This is a great question to help us understand how we should be sorting through answer choices, especially for these central passage or central claim questions, even before we start really diving back into the passage. Because remember, at this point, we're supposed to save these for last. So we would have done all the other questions for this passage before we get to this one. So we should have a pretty good idea about what this is about. We might need to go back and look at specific things to sort through answers, but we have the main idea. We've been talking about it for 10 other questions. So here's some things that I would notice right off the bat between these choices. Choice A, TTV has enabled astronomers to determine more accurately than before the mass of certain planets outside of our solar system. So this is definitely making a comparison more accurately than before. And we should know that comparisons are basically strong words. They're things that we need to prove using the lines in the passage in some way. So unless the passage is comparing two things, we're not allowed to in our answer choice. But most of the choices here are going to do comparisons. Let's look at B. NASA's Kepler spacecraft provided richer data about exoplanets than had been anticipated by the astronomical community. So that's also a comparison. But two differences I noticed. One is the main character of these two choices is different. And maybe that matters as I'm sorting through the summary, right? This is about TTV, this is about the Kepler spacecraft. Maybe they're the same thing. I don't quite remember from the passage, but it's something I would note, and that maybe is the wedge that if I were between A and B, I would use to decide between them. Now, I also noticed in choice B, we have a very strong phrase here. The phrase, it had been anticipated, then had been anticipated by the astronomical community. So that's a good example of like, well, that's a big claim that they thought one thing and then it was completely different. So we would need to back that up with the lines. Looking at C, we see something similar. There are more planets outside of our solar system with an atmosphere similar to that of Earth than had previously been hypothesized. So that is actually kind of the same idea as in B. This kind of, we thought one thing, but then something else ended up being true. And this is also, as far as the main character goes, starting to make it maybe the astronomers or the scientists, because it's not really about the TTV, it's not about the spacecraft, maybe it's about the planets themselves. It's hard for me to know who the main character is for choice C. But let's look at D. Astronomers have gradually become more and more skilled, there's another comparison, more skilled in using TTV to calculate the composition of planets. So this is not to say that any of these choices is automatically wrong based on the stuff I've noticed, but this is how I read these choices. I'm starting to notice these subtle differences right away before I even start thinking and analyzing which ones are right and wrong. So in this case, if I do go back to the passage, I remembered from the intro here and some of the other questions that we've done that it is really about this TTV thing. So we see here this new technique called transit timing variation is enabling astronomers to fill out their picture of dozens of exoplanets. So they talk about it there. They continue throughout this thing to talk about all the different people who have kind of made little discoveries here that helped with this process. See, we can see TTV. It really is about this TTV thing. So just from that, you might pick choice A, which is the correct answer. But let's talk about some of the reasons the other choices might be wrong, and then we can kind of see why it's not just this one main character idea, though it is helpful, especially if we're running out of time and we need some reason to pick a choice. Thinking about what is the passage about, who is the main character, or what is the main character, that can really help us sort through the summaries they give us in these choices. So B and C, I think, are both wrong for that same reason in blue. That things have been previously anticipated or hypothesized. It's not really like there's some sort of surprise that's coming out of this new process or experiment. If we look at the beginning, we would expect to see some sort of like prediction here. They talk about these mini Neptunes. There's just a lot of exoplanets. They were calculating them. This new technique is enabling astronomers to fill out their picture of dozens of exoplanets, the transits, to know whether it's rocky or gaseous. Astronomers need its mass. Traditionally, they resort to ground-based telescopes to determine it by measuring the wobble of the stars the planet tugs on it, but TTV can determine masses from transit data alone. So we're introducing this thing here, and at no point are they really saying, like, we expected one thing and we got something different. They're just saying this is something that's new. It's not new because it somehow throws out some previous hypothesis. That's a big claim in science, and we need to be able to back that up with the passage. They talk about where it came from, this technique, right? This is still the same main character. And this kind of gets us to D a little bit. So if we're getting rid of B and C, D is a little bit more of a tempting choice. Astronomers have gradually become more and more skilled in using TTV, so maybe the main character is the right thing, to calculate the composition of planets. But it's not really about the astronomers getting more and more skilled. It's about TTV letting them do something that they couldn't do before. There are little pieces here and there where they mention the different astronomers, but it's always in service of the TTV thing. It tells them the technique. If both planets were transiting, astronomers could measure the perturbations. For years, however, astronomers failed to detect. This might be where some of you are getting some evidence. Timing variations, because all new known exoplanets were gas giants. Theorists think such planets formed farther away from the star and later barreled inwards, clearing away the companions. The technique became practical thanks to the Kepler spacecraft. So now we finally get the Kepler thing, which until 2013 was monitoring the brightness, blah, blah, blah. It's helping them. They're growing ever since. So does that mean that they're getting more and more skilled? I don't think so. It's maybe that the technique is getting more and more useful, or they solved a problem that was initially there, but it's not like really about the skills of the astronomers. It's about the technique itself and how it's getting used. So maybe now we're trying to really split hairs. And that's why I think the stuff I did originally, kind of finding a wedge to divide these choices and say, this is how they're different. They have different main characters. That kind of dumb summary thinking is really, really important because it lets us see differences that might otherwise get kind of overshadowed by other things in the choices. Our brains on these science passages naturally want to understand the science. But that is not the goal of these things. We don't need to be scientists to understand the reading section of the SAT. We're not supposed to understand the science. It's what they say about the science that matters. And so we're using skills that we would maybe use more to like analyze a book in English class, right? Who is the main character? They seem to be talking a lot about TTV and they keep showcasing that. Everything else that they bring up is kind of in service of that. So I would want my summary to also showcase TTV, and everything else is kind of in service of that as well. The dumb summary ideas with these little main character things, they really do help me because I don't always have the time to reread these passages and understand every nuance of the main idea. So we need these little shortcuts to very quickly just say, these choices are about this, these other choices are about something else, and we don't want that because the passage isn't about that. So hopefully this gives you a lot to think about. These are frustrating questions, and I'll just reiterate something I said at the beginning. Make sure you save the main idea questions for after you've done all the other questions in that passage. Because even if you read the passage first, you still are going to get way more information about the main idea by answering all the other questions. So you have to skip these at first because they're always going to be at the beginning, and then come back to them after you've done everything else. You will have more information, more confidence about what that main idea is, so you'll be more likely to notice these differences and get the right answer.